Nintendo, the very reasonable company that we all love and definitely have no problem with any decision they ever make ever. Boy, is it great to be a Nintendo fan. I love having a brand new Six years. Okay, so the Switch has been out for a while. I'm really glad that the Switch ended up being Nintendo's best-selling console. Because of the Switch's form factor, it was basically able to act as an Android tablet that could also sometimes run AAA games, as well as indie titles, as well as be one of the most capable emulator consoles that, with the right software, could be used to play most, if not the entire Nintendo library. Even games that Nintendo would never voluntarily put on Switch. And because it was able to sell so many units, it also allowed more people to find their new favorite game series. I never imagined I would be a casual Pikmin enjoyer. Yet here I am. But this video is not covering the past 6 years of the Switch. Scott the Woz already did that. Instead, I am looking to the future. What will Nintendo be doing next? Can they strike gold thrice? Will they be able to impress their fan base instead of disappointing them like they usually do almost every single day? I've gathered almost every piece of Nintendo history and combined it with the current trends in the gaming industry, and I now believe I know what Nintendo's 9th generation console will be. And no, I am not talking about the Switch Pro or the Super Nintendo Switch or whatever you want to call it. That console will have to fail in order for the 9th generation console to be a success, but I will talk more about that later. For now, let's begin with... To first understand where I'm coming from with my prediction, I'd like to walk you through the history of Nintendo consoles past, going all the way back to the GameCube. Nintendo does this really hilarious bit where every other console they make ends up being a fucking banger, despite the console being extremely underpowered for the generation they're in, or the lack of games at launch, or the absurd cost that they're released at, or the lack of proper advertising. It really is a miracle Nintendo has lasted this long, isn't it? For example, the Wii. It was pretty much notorious for being one of the best-selling consoles fucking ever. But right before the Wii, we got this funny little box that only sold a little over 21 million units, which is still a really big number, don't get me wrong, just not the amount Nintendo expected to sell. Of course it did much better later on in its life, but it was no Wii. It just simply couldn't replicate the popularity that its younger brother had 5 years later. And once Nintendo got a small taste of the Wii's success, they were immediately addicted to it and tried to hold on to it for as long as they could. By creating the goofiest plastic box known to man, this thing did so bad. The Wii U is notorious for being one of, if not the worst performing Nintendo console by far, only selling around 13 million units in its entire lifespan, which seems like a ton, but it's not jack or shit compared to the Wii's 103 million. Blah blah, big numbers, what does this shit mean? Well, if history is gonna repeat itself, I would say either the Switch Pro or the next gen console afterwards are going to take a massive dip in sales, and I'm betting on it being the Switch Pro for a couple of reasons. Number one, everyone already owns a Switch. Like seriously, I have 2 of them. Unless Nintendo has a Grinch level change of heart overnight and suddenly releases a Switch that has upgraded internals, a better screen, and an APU that can support everything in the Switch library to run at 60 frames at the very least, I doubt anyone except for die-hard Nintendo fans are gonna buy the Switch Pro. Reason number 2, I'm fully expecting Nintendo to just be Nintendo and release a Switch that has bare minimum upgrades that feel way overdue, while also adding new unwanted features that don't really warrant their existence in the first place. If the Switch Pro ends up being like the Wii U in terms of sales, then I am willing to bet Nintendo will think it's about time to end the Switch family of consoles and start the next generation. I haven't even gotten to the actual console yet. Okay, so let's say everything I've said so far actually comes true. The Switch Pro does shit, Nintendo takes it out to the backyard with a shotgun,
and I get the Tinder rap.
Because every Nintendo console must have a gimmick, what will be the new gimmick for the new console? My guess? Everyone knows Nintendo tried and Everyone knows Nintendo tried and failed at making a VR headset console years ago with the Virtual Boy, but just hear me out. I think Nintendo was just a little bit ahead of their time. Virtual reality in the 90s was pretty much still science fiction. It was a concept that hadn't really been developed to the extent that it is today, with headsets and entire game companies building and investing their wealth and popularity entirely in the VR community. There was even this term back then called the hand staring competition. It was a little joke they had back then to describe people looking at their hands for the first time in VR. Funniest shit I've ever seen. But going back to Nintendo, they had no clue what they were doing with the Virtual Boy. This thing was built to stand on a table, it had this weird ass controller, all the games were in blood red. They were just throwing shit at the wall hoping it would work, which it didn't. Yeah, I don't really want to dwell on the console too much. Scott the Woz already did that. The VR space was in its infant stage. The only other notable headset I could find was the VPL iPhone, which was kinda cool, but for the price tag, no thanks. Compared to the handful of really good headsets we have now, and the even bigger handful of VR-related accessories, it seems like we have at least some sort of direction of where we want the VR industry to go in the next couple of decades. The only place where the industry still lacks is the amount of well-known titles and developers that are, well, known. Let me explain. Try to name 5 titles off the 360 that you loved, and that you know a bunch of other people also loved. If you didn't own a 360 back then do the same for the PS3 or the Wii, or whichever other console that you had. My 5 are Minecraft, Terraria, Skate 3, Viva Pinata, and Peggle. Now try doing the same thing for any VR headset. Realistically, the only ones I can think of are Beat Saber and Minecraft, but there's hardly even an official port for Minecraft, and it's not even a game specifically made for VR. See what I'm saying? In fact, most VR games are really just ports of other games that are already on other consoles. And I don't mean to point that out because the VR versions of these games are any bad. It's just because these games were made with the console experience in mind first and the VR experience second. And thus, they don't carry that same identity they would for other platforms. If only there were a company out there that was known for making quirky design choices for their consoles and also made games that had a huge audience that would immediately adopt said console. Oh, hi, Nintendo! Stick with me. Nintendo as a company is probably not the best candidate to research, design, advertise, and ship out a successful VR headset, but it'd be really fucking cool to see them try. There are 2 major reasons I would love to see our VR headset from Nintendo specifically. Backwards compatibility, especially for one specific handheld. If you think about it for a second, a Nintendo VR headset with the proper internals could mean you could play every single Nintendo title ever made. There's already an emulator for every single Nintendo console you can think of. The Switch, the Wii, someone even made an emulator for the Game & Watch handhelds. Also, it's not like Nintendo can't reverse engineer all their consoles whenever they feel like it. So take all of the Nintendo consoles and all of the Nintendo handhelds and throw them in a VR display. Those games no longer have to fit within a screen. They could simply be floating displays that could be resized, stretched, rotated, or manipulated in any way you could imagine. You could even play DS and 3DS games with the touchscreen controls without sacrificing anything from the original experience. Nintendo could even remaster 3DS games to make them have actual 3D graphics. This is big shit we're talking about, man. Second reason being versatility. If we go all the way back to the first ever Switch commercial, there's the scene where these guys are hopping in a van for a road trip. I promise this goes somewhere. And they put this tiny ass fucking Switch screen into this holder, which was never released, by the way. I couldn't find this thing anywhere. Instead, let's ditch the holder. With VR headsets, you can have the screen as big as you want without ever getting in the way of someone else. This would be perfect for both multiplayer games or long car trips. There is literally no downside. If you don't think this is possible, would you believe me if I said something like this has already been created? These are the Vitcher 1 XR glasses. Not exactly a VR headset, but it proves the concept being used in a real life scenario. Essentially, these are just display panels and a pair of glasses, but according to the reviews, it is a quality working device that proves physical screens can be replaced with virtual ones given the right hardware. Of course, the actual headset would have to be way lighter, have some Nintendo mid-range hardware in there. Harder? What the fuck am I talking about? Of course, the actual headset would have to be way lighter, have some Nintendo mid-range hardware in them, have a Quest-like UI experience, some half-decent controllers, a handful of games at launch, with backwards compatibility promised later in its life, and Nintendo could be raking in hundreds of millions again. Whether this headset ends up being a VR/Switch hybrid, or its own standalone product, or even a product at all, if Nintendo played their cards right and delivered a device that stands out from other headsets on the market, I think Nintendo could have a very promising future and an even more exciting generation than the current one. This wasn't even planned, but Nintendo released a joke trailer for a headset called the Virtual Boy Pro, and everyone in the comments unanimously agreed that an actual VR headset from Nintendo would probably be really good. Again, this is Nintendo we're talking about, so the most we would probably get would be a slightly less powerful Quest 2 that costs a little bit more than the Quest 3. Nintendo's pricing structure could be a whole video on its own, but I probably won't make a video on it. Mainly because Scott the Woz already had it. Hey, this is post-editing Celeste. Thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. I spent like a fucking month, I think. This is like the most effort I put into one video, so yeah, the next upload, that's to like the next video that I'm gonna be working on. So yeah, subscribe if you wanna see that. That's all I had to say. Okay, I'm gonna let you go now. Bye bye.